Hi, and welcome to this session. My name's Claire Harvey from Untitled Limited, and I'm really excited to be participating in Lesbian Visibility Week with DIVA and all these amazing sponsors, as you can see on this slide. So what are we going to be doing in this session? We're going to be talking about how to build resilience in uncertain times. This is going to be a whistle stop, around about 30-minute session. And what I'm going to aim to do is give you an overview of some of the tools and techniques that we can use to really build resilience. This is important for a number of reasons. First, as you can see on the slide, whilst we like to think our career is going to be calm and smooth and a very linear path, we know in reality that there is always bumps along the way. So if we haven't got that resilience, then those bumps become bigger, they become harder to get over, and sometimes they can really stop us getting where we need to be. The other thing, of course, is that uncertainty is the new norm, both in terms of our careers and the workplace and the future of the workplace, but also, of course, in terms of what's going on at the moment with COVID-19. We often talk in the corporate world about a VUCA economy, a volatile economy, an uncertain economy, a really complex environment that we're working in, and getting used to the fact that what's going to happen, how it's going to happen, what does the future look like is increasingly ambiguous. So if we can build these skills now, then it's really going to help us thrive in an uncertain world. Resilience is also one of the core elements of high performance. When we think about being successful, when we think about thriving, you can see on the screen now some of the core elements of doing that. I'm going to talk about resilience. I'm also going to put a little bit of growth mindset in there. And later on in the week, I'm going to do a session on well-being. But you'll see here some of the real elements that you need to work on. So if we get these two right, we're some of the way there. So what do we mean by resilience? Just take a second on your own to think about, when you think about the word resilience, what does it conjure up for you? I think personally, as a psychologist, it's a word that's been really, really overused and has the wrong connotations a lot in society. We like to think of it as something that people have or they don't. We hear people say, oh, that person's really resilient, or that person doesn't have any resilience, as if it's something that we're given or we're not given, whereas in reality, it's absolutely something we can build. But it also is not that we're superhuman. I think many of us have come to the assumption that if we're not some kind of superhero where everything just bounces off us and we're not affected by anything that's happening, then we don't have any resilience. That's absolutely not true. Notice that I put the X onto the side so you could still carry on looking at the pictures of superwomen should you so desire. What we're actually talking about when we talk about resilience is a set of behaviors. Spring back ability, if you like. If you're a geeky psychologist like me, it's actually called epistemic character. If you're not a geeky psychologist, think of it as the ability to flounder intelligently, the ability to know what to do when you don't know what to do. We can think of it in these three ways: whether you can recover from setbacks or when you feel under pressure, whether you can adapt well to change rather than just adapt to change, and whether you can really keep going by trying different approaches when what you're trying is not working. Just again, spend a couple of seconds thinking to yourself, those three boxes, how would you rate yourself in those three boxes? So we can think about resilience as a toolkit, as a set of skills that we know what to do when we don't know what to do, when we feel that anxiety gaining or something is happening outside of our control. It's made up of three magic components: our habits, our attitudes, and our responses. And we're going to unpick these one at a time. So let's first of all think about our habits, core components that we can build into our everyday lifestyle and everyday things that we do that will really help you build your resilience are these: choosing your mindset, learning from experience, connecting what you're doing to your bigger purpose, and building authentic relationships with people that matter. I'm going to unpick a couple of them, but in the benefits of time, I'm just going to skip over a few and give you some things to think about. Think about your core purpose. How often do you really think about what matters to you? What do you love? What are you passionate about? What do you want to be known for in the future? What do you want your legacy to be? And how much do you think about what am I doing today and does it get me further towards that? Is it one step in that direction or is it not? When we found that what we're doing has real meaning to us, whatever that is to us individually, we know that when times are hard, it's much easier to keep going. When we also think about building authentic relationships with people that matter, think about how often in today's society, in a fast paced world, in a transactional workplace, we're often like vending machines. We go to people when we want something, we say thank you very much, and then we leave until we want something from that person again. If you can build authentic relationships with people, really get to know people, really understand who they are, really understand what their purpose is, and build some trust between you, then you'll find that when times are tough, it's much easier to lean on each other and really work together in those situations. We also need to think in terms of our habits about protecting our well-being. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about this slide because I'm doing a session later in the week on positive well-being and well-being masterclass. But you can see from what's written here some things that you can really do, because if you can't build positive mental and physical health, then it's really difficult to thrive. So think about that. And as I said, we'll discuss that in the next webinar. The next thing we can do is selecting our mindset. Thinking, am I in learning mode or am I in performance mode? Now, this is a strange thing, and it comes from Carol Dweck's growth mindset model. We've come to think about growth mindset as being good and fixed mindset as being bad. In actual fact, we need both in our lives. Growth mindset is where we're willing to learn, we're willing to improve, we recognize that we're going to fail. We recognize that we want feedback and we're going to benefit from the process even though it's hard. Fixed mindset on the other side, performance mode, is when we want to success. We want to show how easily we can do things. We want to just do it quickly. We recognize that doing things wrong is highly risky, and therefore we'll always go to our go-to method of how we do things. We don't really want feedback because we don't want to question what we're doing and risk the effects of not recognizing we're successful. And cheating and taking shortcuts becomes a real option because it's the outcome that matters, not the process. As I said, it's not that growth mindset is good and fixed mindset is bad. We absolutely need both. I'm a consultant, and I'm not going to go to one of my clients and say, oh, you want to talk about positive psychology? I know a little bit about it, but we'll learn together, and won't it be a good journey? Of course, I want to demonstrate my skills. If you have young people around you who are coming up to exam period, of course, you don't want them to sit in an exam and go, I know exactly how to do this thing, but I think I'll try something different and see how it goes. So there are absolute times when we want both, but what we need to do is learn how to move between each other and learn to recognize the behaviors that tell us we're in that learning mode and we're open to learn and we're willing to try things differently. Or we've been moved into that performance mode where perhaps we're wanting to show that we can do things and we're shutting down the learning that comes with those things. So we can think about this on a mindset continuum. When you're in that performance mode, you want to look smart. You avoid challenges. You give up easily as soon as something's not working because it's not worth doing. You see failure as fruitless or catastrophic to your personal brand, and you feel threatened by the success of others. These are the times when you're in meetings and you find yourself needing to say something because if you don't say something, you're not important. On the other hand, that learning mode is when you absolutely will embrace changes. You'll keep going in the face of setbacks because you recognize the learning in that. You see failure as really essential to mastery, and you find lessons and inspirations when you see other people doing things that you're not. We all have a natural starting point. You'll be somewhere along this continuum. But I want you to spend a few minutes thinking about where are you on this natural continuum? But most importantly, what are the situations that pull you one way or another? So I know, for example, when I'm tired or I'm hungry, I go straight to that fixed mindset. When I feel like someone is micromanaging me, I go straight into that performance zone and I become a different person to when I feel safe and I'm in that learning zone. Just spend some time, if you're watching this pre-recorded, pause the video now and think about what are the situations and what are the behaviors that you start to see that move you one way or the other. The next thing we can think about when we're in that performance zone and we're moving towards the learning zone and we're seeing the benefit in failing, which is a core part of resilience, we can think about how do we fail safely. We call this failing forward. How do we see failing as a route to success? It requires a number of things, and you can see them on the screen now, so I'm not going to read them out. But these are some of the things that we can build into both our own thinking, our own rhythms and ways of behaving, but also if you're thinking about the workplace, your team's rhythms and behaviors of working that help us see that failing within appropriate boundaries, within considered risks, is absolutely positive. If we see the benefits of failing and we feel safer to fail, of course, the pressure and therefore the resilience will be ultimately changed and we'll feel more able to take the risks and feel under less pressure. So that's habits. Now we're going to look at the second part of our three, our attitude. Are we a person who has an optimistic attitude, or are we a person who always looks for the negatives in things? Again, neither is wrong nor right, but recognize where you are and recognize what can you do to move yourself more towards optimism. The lens that we look through determines how we see situations. Think about you in the workplace and how you've gone into a day thinking, oh, this is going to be a horrendous day, and how actually that's exactly what it ended up being, versus those days where you go in thinking this is going to be a great day and you might just surprise yourself on how much fun you can have. I'm going to talk about some of the other parts of this component, attitudes. The first is where we're spending our time. Are we in our comfort zone, or are we pushing ourselves into our growth zone? Now, your comfort zone is the space where you know exactly what you're doing, everything is under your control, you can do your job day in, day out, nothing surprises you. You can do your job whilst thinking about your shopping list, thinking about what you're going to have for dinner, thinking about the 15 other things you're thinking about. It's really not taxing you in any way. When we start to move out of that zone, we go into our fear zone, where we know what we should be doing, we know what we'd like to do, but we find excuses for not doing it. We lack self-confidence, and therefore we think, oh, what if it goes wrong? It's better to just stay where I am. And what other people think about what we're planning to do is deeply impacting on our own behaviors. Once we move through that zone, we start to go into our learning zone, where we're dealing with new challenges and problems, we're gaining new skills and experience, and we're starting to expand our comfort zone. Human nature is that wherever we go out of our comfort zone, we want to come back. But actually, if we can hold ourselves in these zones a little bit more, then we're going to be in a better place. When we get into our growth zone is the one step further. When we're dealing with those challenges and problems, we're gaining those new experiences, but we're instilling them, we're embedding them, we're taking the learning from them and using them in different spaces. We're not back in that fear zone where we feel overwhelmed, but we're just about on the edge of comfortable, but ultimately we do feel like we're safe. So perhaps it's about taking a skill that you've already got and putting it in a different context. Transferring it so you're having to think, you're having to work hard, but you don't feel overwhelmed, you're not anxious, you're not losing sleep, those kind of things. Again, spend some time thinking about where do you spend most of your time, both in work but also in home. We talk a lot about that fear zone and the risk that that has for our mental health, but actually the comfort zone has exactly the same level of risk. So if we spend too much time and we're not challenged and we're just doing what we're good at and we're doing it time and time again and we're really comfortable and safe, whilst it feels nice for a short period of time, for the rest of the time it can really damage our mental health. It can really lose the stimulus that our brains need, and we can start to feel apathetic, and we can start to feel lethargic, and we can start to lose that purpose that we've got. So think about you and where do you spend more time? The more time that we can spend in that learning zone and that growth zone, the more time we can recognize that fear zone and work through it anyway, the more resilient we're going to be, because we've recognized that we did something, we learned some skills, we did something that worked. Again, if you can think about what did I do that took me through that fear zone into the learning zone? What was it that really worked well? What am I going to replicate next time? What didn't work so well? And rather than adding fear, think about what therefore am I going to do differently? It broadens that toolkit that we are talking about in resilience. The next thing we can think about is what happens when it goes wrong. That mindset that we have can either really put it in a, okay, it didn't go so well, what are we going to do differently? Or it can allow a whole cycle of events that far too often for most of us happens. This is our unhealthy thinking cycle. So something goes wrong. Perhaps I did a presentation last week and it didn't quite work out how I planned. If I don't just stop at that point and analyze what happened, take it away, use it up, let go of the emotion with it and move on, it can add to this cycle. So that adversity, that presentation that I did that didn't go quite so well becomes a belief. I'm not good at presentations. When we're feeling low resilience, we tend to think about things as good or bad. We succeeded or we failed. Whereas, of course, in reality, there's always some middle ground. There's always some bits that went well and some bits that didn't go quite well. So try and break it down like that. Otherwise, you get to that point where it becomes a belief. I am no good at presentations. Of course, what happens next time I go to do a presentation is I have in my head already, I'm no good at presentations. And it makes me so nervous. It makes me so anxious. That's the lens that I look through, that of course I don't perform well, which takes me right back to the start. So we can tackle that unhealthy thinking cycle by breaking it down, owning the bits we want, thinking about what are we going to do differently, but then not tying it to a wider belief. Think about something in your current situation where perhaps you can see this pattern working for you, and what could you do to limit its damage? Building on from that, recognizing that none of us are perfect, one of the attitudes we can have is that life is a journey. I love Maya Angelou, and this is one of my favorite quotes from her. Do the best you can until you know better. And when you know better, do better. But don't give yourself a hard time because you didn't know better beforehand. If we're trying our best, that's all we can ever ask of ourselves. So think about that journey for you. Spend some time thinking, what are you really great at? And be comfortable saying the things that you're great at. As women, we tend to be really uncomfortable in that space. You're not going, I am awesome, unless, of course, you are. You're just being comfortable, factually stating the things that you know you're pretty good at, and you can feel comfortable in that space. The second thing, separating out your weaknesses, is work out what you're not good at, but you're actually okay with. I have an allergic reaction to spreadsheets. I love designing things. I love getting involved in projects. But as soon as somebody brings a spreadsheet out, I just panic because I can't do them. I don't understand them. I don't like them. And often that creates a situation where I say, okay, I don't want to do this anymore because of that fear situation. Actually, I've got to the point where I'm okay not liking spreadsheets. It doesn't massively influence my job nowadays. I know there are other people I can go to. I know I can ask someone else to do that job, and I don't feel like I need to do it all myself. So recognize that there are some things that you just aren't any good at, that right now it doesn't really impinge where you want to be. And so let go of it. As women, we're really bad for wanting to be good at everything in every single part of our life. And that's just simply not possible. As my granny used to say, you can do anything, but you can't do everything. So learn to let go and separate out those things that right now just don't matter. The next thing is to think about those things that perhaps you're not so good at, but they do matter, and therefore you're working on them. And make it okay to be working on them rather than be at the end result. Again, recognizing that you're not perfect and not holding yourself to that level of expectation can really help you build your resilience, particularly in times of change when what you need to be good at might suddenly change. The next thing, once we've got that sense of ourselves and what we're good at, what we're not good at, what we don't need to be good at right now, we can use that to develop our confidence and our self-belief. Now, often we talk about these two things as they're built into one. They are very, very different. Confidence is what you show people on the outside. Self-belief is what you feel on the inside. And we can use people to think about who perhaps look really confident but inside don't have much self-belief, and then there are other people who inside have huge self-belief but perhaps don't demonstrate it externally. What we want to get to is the point where you have both. We can use our brains and our bodies to kid ourselves and to help ourselves learn both of these things, and they'll get us through those difficult periods where we perhaps don't have as much resilience as we could. So for example, we can tell ourselves that we're better at things. We can visualize great ways of doing things. When you go into a difficult situation at work, it's really natural to think about all the things that could go wrong. What if this person responds badly? What if this doesn't work so well? What if I look stupid? Whatever that is for you. Instead of that, what we can do is visualize that conversation, that situation working perfectly. What that does is it floods our brain with all the positive chemicals and hormones, and that actually makes us feel more confident. So we're using our brain to trick our external application of confidence. You then find that people respond differently to you, because if you're looking confident, often people respond with a level of reassurance and a level of positivity towards you. But we can also do this the other way around. We can use our body to trick our brain into feeling more confident. It's called the power pose. If you want to look at it further, look at someone called Brené Brown, an amazing psychologist. I would wholeheartedly recommend you look at her online. And what she taught us was, if we have big body spaces just for less than 2 minutes, it actually floods our body with testosterone and some of the other hormones that make us feel more confident. Think about you when you go for an interview, when you're nervous. What we tend to do is we wrap ourselves in, we make ourselves as small as we can, and what that does is it tricks our brain into thinking there's a threat, and our stress hormone gets released, and it makes us feel even more worried than we were. What Brené Brown told us was, through years of studying, that a big body pose, imagine a power pose, a Wonder Woman pose, just for 2 minutes before you're going into a difficult situation where you don't really know what you're doing or you're feeling a little bit insecure, will absolutely flood your body and make you perform better and feel more confident in yourself. Just some quick tips to really help you get past those points where fear might get in the way. So here we get to the third part of our magic 3, our responses. And I purposely choose the word response because far too often when we feel under pressure, we use reaction. Our fight or flight stimulus come in and we tend to react to different circumstances. We should always focus, when our resilience is low, on recognizing that whatever event has happened, no matter how much we were or were not in control of it, we have a choice of how we respond. And it's the event and the response which produces the outcome. So we have at least 50% of the input that will change the outcome. Often when we feel change, we recognize that as a sign of powerlessness, and therefore we react instantly. But if we can always choose our response. The other thing is to ask for help. As women, again, what we tend to do often is we love it when other people ask us for help. But when we need to ask for help, we put lots of barriers in the way. Oh, that person will be too busy. They won't want to hear from me. It's late at night. They'll think I'm stupid, whatever it is for you. If you can get used to asking for help, even when you don't feel low resilience, even when things are going swimmingly, if you can get used to, in your rhythms of doing things, say, this is what I'm doing. Does anyone know anything that can help me? Would anyone like to get involved? Then when you do struggle, you'll find asking for help so much easier. Let's unpick some of the other situations in this response category. The first of all is taking control, focusing on energy on things we can actually control. When something happens, take this current situation, we can get so caught up in the emotion and the thinking and the energy of, why has the government done this? Why has this happened? Why has someone else not done these? And these are things that we are never going to be able to control. By practicing focusing in on what we can directly control or have a strong influence on, can really help us gain power and build our resilience. So the government's decided we all need to be on lockdown. I cannot control that whatsoever, but what I can control is, what do I do with my time in this lockdown? Accepting the thing that you can't control as if it was something that you really wanted all the time, and working out what you're going to do to respond to it, can make a huge difference to how you feel and a huge difference to how you manage that change process. Just again, spend some time thinking about you, think through a current situation and think, how much time do you take that control back, or how much time do you spend your energy and your thinking on things that you ultimately can have absolutely no control over? For some people, they find that writing lists is a great way of doing this. Just writing the list of what you're going to do, even if you end up doing nothing on the list, just can help you settle, can help you feel like you've got some control, and can help you see the next steps a little bit clearer. The next thing we need to do is recognize that change is a process, and there is a very normal, natural process that we go through when change happens. We love the idea of change, but very few of us like change. And therefore, we're always going to go through this process. What you're seeing on the screen now is the change curve. And you'll see that as soon as something happens and a change happens, our initial response is either shock or anger. We focus on what happened in the past. You might see this in the workplace all the time. You will have moaned about a system or a structure for years and years and years. As soon as someone starts to change it, you suddenly become very wed to that process. You loved what it did. We also see this when we trade in cars. You will have hated your car for months. You'd have gone and looked for new cars. And yet, when you drive your car in to have trade it in for the last time, you suddenly have a little bit of a love affair with your car, and you wonder if you're doing the right thing. It's a very normal, natural response to change. Once we've got through the past stage, where in the shock and the anger, we tend to go into resistance. We might completely deny it's happening. We might refuse to talk about the change. We might really resent the change. We might become anxious or fear about the change, depending on us as a person. But again, recognizing this is a really natural process. Gradually, once we start to live and embed and think about the change, and we recognize it's not going away, we might move to exploration, where we're uncertain about it, but we start to test it. In the workplace, you'll hear people say, I don't think it's going to work, but just tell me about it. I don't like it, but tell me about it and tell me how I have to involve in it. Just starting to test the process. And then once we do test it and we realize it's not as bad as perhaps we thought it was, and we start to use that attitude piece of, we see the positivity, we see the benefits, we start to think about how this is going to help us grow, for example, we start to then move towards commitment, where we're thinking about how we accept it and we're starting to put it into process. Now, the bad thing about this curve is we can't fast track it. We can't jump from the past to commitment straight away. We have to go through each of these stages. Depending on you as a person and depending on your toolkit, that resilience toolkit that you have, the quicker you might go through this process. But you do have to go through every 4 parts. This also becomes important in the workplace, particularly as a manager, because at the time that you're announcing a change that you've probably thought about and been working on and are really signed up to, you're at the commitment stage, but the time that you announce it will take people straight back to the first pass stage. So whilst you're really committed to it and you understanding and you accept it, you have to accept that other people still need to go through this curve. Look at this curve, think about a situation that you're in right now, perhaps involving change, perhaps involving the current situation, whatever works for you, and think about, how do you recognize those behaviors in yourself? Try and work out where you are right now on this curve. But I don't want to leave you just thinking, well, that's it, I can't do anything, I have to go through it. There are things we can do to help us recognize the behaviors and speed up the process to get us through the curve. So when we're in that denial past stage, we'll recognize that people will focus on the past. We might withdraw. We might try and rationalize things where perhaps there's not a rationalization to be had. And what we can do to help us move through that process is confront ourselves with information, focus on what's happening right now, and make ourselves accountable for something we're going to do. When we're in that resistance stage, we might be angry, we might blame people, we might go into a depression, we might become actively aggressive about something. Or we might think that people don't care. People don't care about us. Your company doesn't care about us because if they did, they wouldn't do this. What we can do to help us go through that is listen to what's being not said. Listen to the inference in what other people are saying, but also what you're saying to yourself, and try and work out what's really going on, what's really upsetting you. You have to show personal commitment to it, even if you don't necessarily understand it yet. Just say, I'm going to act like this is going to happen and it's positive just for 24 hours and see what happens. And then there's sometimes when you have to go, really, I don't want to be part of this change and I'm not going to be part of it. But they're few and far between. As we move into exploration, that's where we find we get busy, frantically busy. I'm sure for most of us, definitely not alone, and most of us during this period have started to make lists of the 1,000 things you've wanted to do in your house and never had time for. We have a lot of energy, we do a lot of different things, but there's not necessarily any coherence towards that. And often it can lead to confusion or chaos. The things we can do to help ourselves through that process is really guide our priorities. What needs to be done right now? What can actually wait? What's a huge job? What's a much smaller job? What are the quick wins that will help me move forward versus the huge things that are going to be really difficult to achieve? We can provide information to improve our analysis so we don't get stuck in that chaos fact. We can pick the things that we're listening to and pick the things that we're not listening to, and we can set ourselves really short-term goals. Set yourself something to do in the next 24 hours and make sure you've done it. And then think about the next 24 hours rather than think at the end of this whole next 3 weeks, this is what I want to have done. And as we move into that commitment stage, we'll start to see us looking for a new challenge. We'll start to perhaps even to see us frustrated with the speed that things are happening. You might have decided you're painting your house throughout this lockdown period, and suddenly you have to realize you have to wait forever to go onto a website and order paint or those kind of things. And what we can do to get through that process is to help us think about long-term goals, to celebrate the successes of things that we have achieved rather than focus on what we haven't achieved yet, and to really think about, so what next? What am I going to do with this? This change has happened. I've embraced it, but what am I going to tangibly do with it? Because that's the move where we go from a change to a transition, recognizing that we never quite get there, but it's an internal thing that we're selecting. Selecting it like it's something that we wanted and we're embracing it rather than it's something that's being done to us. I love this Robin Sharma quote: change is hard at first, messy in the middle, but gorgeous at the end. And if we think about transition, if we focus on those times of uncertainty as a transition, then we start to feel the benefits at the end rather than focus on the pain in the middle. We also give ourselves time because we recognize that transition takes time, rather than want things to happen quickly or feel like things are happening at a point that we can't control. So here are some technical things we can do to help you navigate that change and really focus on responding rather than reacting. So here are some of the questions. Again, I won't read them because you can see them on the screen, but things that you can think about to help you break down what's happening, to help you give some control, and to help you think about what do you want to do next. But then always end with, okay, so what is my next step? And come out with a tangible next thing. The more we do that, the more we build that toolkit of resilience, that we're learning what worked, we're learning what didn't, and we're at least starting one step quicker than that sense of chaos that we can sometimes find ourselves almost paralyzed in. Here are some things we can do if you're thinking about a manager, thinking about how do you develop a resilient team around you, particularly in this kind of virtual world at the moment. I'll just pick on a couple. Really measure and reward effort and courage and innovation rather than who did it quickest, who did it best. Because that just, again, thinking back to that performance and learning mode that we talked about at the start, if you as a manager are always talking about how quickly someone did it, how well someone did it, how fast someone did it, how effortlessly someone did it, then you're pushing people into that performance zone rather than the learning zone. If you're rewarding people on effort and courage and it was difficult and you kept going, then you're going to help people feel safe to be in that space. And of course, if you're doing all of these things to your team, it's really important that you role model them yourself too. So we're very close to the end now, and I just wanted to sum up. I've given you a lot of things to think about. And again, you'll have the MP4, so feel free to pause it and go back as much as you like. But biggest part of resilience is recognizing that life is a work in progress and that it's never complete. And so we're constantly learning a different lesson. And if we aren't open to learning those lessons, then we're never going to get the experiences from it. The more we can think about floundering and feeling out of control as a positive and a growth to a new direction, the more we're going to really embrace those changes. The future is about learning, is about unlearning, and is about relearning. And if we see difficult times, if we see times when we feel out of control, we don't know what to do, as just part of this process from learning what we already know, having to rethink some things because they're not quite working so well for us, and therefore having to relearn different ways of doing things, then we're absolutely going to be one step closer to thriving. Unfortunately, life is never going to be that linear. Life is never going to be that smooth, calm path where everything goes wonderfully. But what we can always reflect back on is life is 10% of what happens to us, but 90% of how we react to it. So using those skills that we've just talked about, let's embrace this change. Let's embrace those difficult times, and let's know that even when we're floundering, we can do it intelligently. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you found it useful, and I look forward to speaking to you again later in the week.